So, hey, what do you call a boat that doesn't allow criticism?
What?
A censorship.
I think we need to start censoring your dad jokes.
Yep.
Hello, and welcome to For Your Reference, brought to you by the Council on Library and Information Resources. I'm Robin.
And Paris?
And I'm Joshua.
And it looks like I might be canceled, folks. It was bound to happen at some point.
We're going to give you one more chance.
Yeah, but please use it wisely.
We'll see. So today we're going to be talking about censorship and banned books, and I'm pretty sure all of us have strong opinions about these topics.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So personally, I've got a bit of a rant about it, and we all know what that means.
We do. Is it time for the Glampire Strikes Back?
It is. A truly great library contains something in it to offend everyone. So goes the quote by librarian Joe Godwin. Our general philosophy as a profession is to make as much information available to as many people as we can, and then it's your decision what you want to read or to believe. And banning books is something that most, if not all, of us would rail against. We even dedicate a week every year to discussions around the practice. You can find more about that at Banned Books Week at bannedbooksweek.org. Some very famous names have landed on these lists over the years. Mark Twain, William Faulkner, Stephen King, Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, J.R.R. Tolkien, Judy Blume, Anne Rice, Hitler. And hey, even if you think banning Hitler is a good thing, you need to remember the Holy Bible has also landed on that list. So, for our profession, do we decide to draw arbitrary lines in the sand, or do we work to provide all the information that we can and try to educate ourselves to think critically about the information we consume? I, for one, vote for the latter. Libraries, by definition, are not trying to indoctrinate anyone. I recall that on the wall in the newsroom of the Charlotte Observer, where I used to work, hung a sign that said, "Talk is cheap, free speech is not." And also had a professor who noted regularly that the best way to counter bad speech is with more speech. Excising ideas from the public sphere, even ones that make us uncomfortable, is not the way forward in a civilized society. Figuring out a way to have productive conversations about our differences just might be. And that is what we're going to talk about with our special guest in Reviewer 2. Welcome to Reviewer 2, where we invite scholars on the show to barrage them with questions about their work, hopefully in a way that is productive and interesting rather than soul-killing. Our guest today is Dr. Elizabeth Thorpe, Associate Professor of Rhetoric at SUNY Brockport. Welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you.
So before we dive into the meat of this episode, can you give us your elevator speech on your work, sort of what you do? And
yeah, absolutely. So what I do is I basically look at legal rhetoric and free speech. That's the core of what I do. Undergirding that is kind of an interest in American identity. I'm really curious as to who we are, or at least who we say we are. And the connection there is, the truth of it is, who we say we are kind of gets written into the law, right? Like, who we are is very clearly a matter of who gets to speak and who gets written into the law and who we allow to be a part of national conversations. So I kind of connect this notion of who gets to speak and who we say we are.
Great. So a lot of what tends to get banned or challenged tends to revolve around obscenity, which individuals define in different ways. The law has very specific ideas about what that means. And historically, blasphemy has also been at issue in challenged content. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So, the word obscenity gets thrown around a lot, usually by people who don't know what it means, legally speaking. Um, when we talk about obscenity in terms of like constitutional law kind of questions, on the one hand, it is something specific, but on the other hand, it's actually really hard to define, right? Like, obscenity is something that is supposed to be understood in kind of local parameters, right? Like if something is obscene, it appeals to prurient interests, and that's not a word that's used very often. It basically means like appealing to sexual curiosity and interests, but it has to be the whole thing appeals to sexual interests. And that means you can't cherry pick. So, like, if one part of it is really sexual in nature, that doesn't make the whole thing seen. The whole thing has to be like appealing to sexual interests. It has to be excessively that way, and it has to be understood within the community in which it is produced. And that's really important to understand because something that is patently offensive in my area of the woods may not be I'm in New York, may not be patently offensive or maybe more patently offensive in Tennessee and vice versa, right? So understandings of what's inappropriate differs from community to community. Blasphemy is kind of an interesting thing because it's wild to think about it, but up until like, I want to say 1952 or 1956, you could actually be prosecuted for making fun of religion. When I talk about this with my classes, I mean, like The Simpsons and Family Guy, or that show Lucifer, which we watched like a lot, that would have been illegal. It's just like wild to think about, right? Like so much
Yeah.
of what we think of just kind of discourse, this is just what we do and what we laugh at, would have been like you could have been thrown in jail because that's just who we
Yeah.
were as a nation. We did not make fun of religion, that was unacceptable. And a lot of this gets wrapped up into things like how we talked about evolution and the Scopes monkey trial and things that you don't
Right.
necessarily think of as being interconnected, but just in kind of the discursive tapestry that is who we are and the legal ways we approach discourse and that kind of thing. Um, Obscenity and blasphemy have kind of separated, and we think of them as two different categories now. But obscenity, on the one hand, we've kind of backed off in terms of like, oh, we allow porn, and we're much kind of looser in how we think of what is acceptable. But on the other hand, things like indecency, which is a whole other category, we've gotten a lot more freaked out about. Like, we're a lot more strict about what can be on network TV and that kind of thing in some ways. So
Yeah.
that was a long answer to what should have been a simple question, but that's not my bag. I don't do simple. Mm.
Not so sure the question was that simple.
Speaking of things that have gotten incredibly complicated and interwoven, I wanted to ask you about the distinction that you make between censorship and what we now very affectionately call cancel culture.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that distinction?
Yeah. So I think this is a really important distinction, and it's something that uh, one of the last things I published was specifically about this. So cancel culture, let's talk about censorship first. Censorship is very specifically when the government tells you you cannot speak. It is a kind of prior restraint, right? We are not allowing this sort of speech. That is very different than cancel culture, because cancel culture is when the audience, not the government, the audience doesn't say, we're not allowing you to speak. The audience says, we will not listen anymore. So there's a very different approach to speech in this sense. Censorship is when an institution tells you, we're not going to allow this anymore. Cancel culture is really kind of the opposite of that. It's when the receptive audience says, we are no longer receptive.
That makes sense. So you'd say cancel culture is really more similar to shaming or shunning even though it's been behaviors that we've had for forever, right?
Yeah, I would 100% say that. I am loath to put it in kind of market terms, but in many ways, cancel culture is just kind of capitalism at work, right? Like people saying, not going to buy this speech anymore, I'm done with it. And it's very frustrating to see so many people who champion the market so much. Like when the market doesn't sing, they're like, oh no, we can't have that. Like, make up your mind. Like, I'm not a fan of the market, but
Yeah.
it's doing its thing now. So what do you want from us?
The market giveth and the market taketh
The market
away.
take it away. That's right.
So you mentioned this briefly. You recently published an article, and it was in Communication Law Review. The title it was "Cancel Culture and the Third Persona." That entire issue, by the way, which I read, was outstanding. I recommend you read it if you can get to it. It was dedicated to discussions of cancel culture, but you talk specifically about that third persona, which is. I won't try to belabor the question. Just can you talk more about that?
Yeah. So I don't think you can understand the third persona without kind of contextualizing with the second persona, but I think I can do this in a digestible way. So I don't think it's particularly mind melting to say, like, when we speak, we kind of create characters. That's not pandering. That's just a matter of saying, like, Dr. Thorpe is a different person who speaks than like Elizabeth, than Mom, than any of these kind of personas that I inhabit on any given day. Just like weirdly enough, my family doesn't appreciate it when I come home and lecture to them on the second or third persona. And it's just not good dinner conversation. But you know, that is what I have to do in the classroom, just because it's just a different character you inhabit. The second and third persona is the much more complicated idea that audiences are equally as constructed. So, example, if I, as a professor, walk into my intro level communication class and I explain to them what the second and third persona are, and I do it in a understandable way, and I give them examples, and I do my best to make this accessible, and we have a good conversation, and I give them examples they're familiar with, and I make it as clear as possible. I've done my job, right? I've I have I have excelled in what I'm supposed to do, right? Contrast, if I walk into that same class and I speak only in like philosophical and theoretical terms, and all of my examples are like, oh, ancient Grecian this, and a speech that you've never heard of because it was this 19th century orator that only people who are like steeped in rhetorical blah 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 would know. Like, not only am I a jerk, but I am not doing my job well, right? Like, these are very different circumstances. The mechanism that is different there is when that second example happens, I'm actually speaking to an audience that is different than the audience that is present. That's an example of the second and third persona, because what I did is I walked into that classroom and I was speaking to them like they were rhetorical experts. The
Hmm.
audience that I constructed in my mind as like the ideal audience in that second example was rhetorical experts who could understand these kind of esoteric examples, who could follow a completely theoretical conversation. In that second example, that was my ideal audience. I was constructing an audience that could follow me as an expert, and my ideal audience was fellow experts. Okay, the reason the third persona comes into play is the third persona is like the flip side of that. The third persona is the audience that you other or silence, right? They're the people that you devalue in your speech. And the reason an example like that is kind of egregious is because in that example, the people that I'm devaluing or silencing is actually specifically the people that are in my present audience, right? The people that I'm saying you don't count are those people that don't understand rhetoric and need more accessible examples. So that's my third persona right there. Second persona is the ideal audience, the people that you think in your mind, this is exactly who I need to think about. Third persona is the people that you are silencing, that are the other, that don't count in your mind. And the reason this is very applicable to a conversation on censorship is when we censor, that is like the manifestation of censorship. If the third persona, if the third persona is constructing an audience that says you don't count, you don't get to speak, censorship is when we literally write that into being. These are the people who don't get to speak. These are the people who do not count. So censorship is really just taking what we construct in the third persona and writing it into the law. Did that make sense? Did I clarify some of these things?
Yes, I believe so.
I just want to switch gears a little bit. Can you actually talk to us about how social media platforms really facilitate the formation and expression of the third persona, and what specific features like the like buttons and things like that or dynamics contribute to this phenomenon?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That is such a wild question in so many ways. On the one hand, it is very easy to see how social media can contribute to creating silence audiences. Because on the one hand, social media allows us to create like echo chambers and these, we call them social groups, but are they social? Like we don't see each other. I don't know. Very weird. But like we create in groups, right? So um this is the group that's like conservatives threatening us with a good time, and they post memes about how dumb conservatives are. Laugh and laugh and laugh. And this is the group about, uh, libs of TikTok, and right, they post
Yeah.
memes and about how libs are. Like these are obvious examples of how social media is allowing us to create. This is our audience who we are appealing to, our ideal audience of conservatives or liberals, whoever. And then there's the audience outsiders, right? Like we are making fun of these people. We don't want these people to be able to talk to us. But what's more insidious than that, than just we can create insiders and outsiders, because the algorithm that is behind so much of social media kind of exacerbates that, right? Like, even in terms of things like misinformation and fake news and that kind of thing. Those things which get engagement get further engagement because they get pushed out more, right? So if this news story, which is particularly salacious and it um, is negative towards this group, it will get more and more reach because people like it. So that's going to be what is shared, and then more people like it, and that's going to be what is shared over and over again. So it's not just that social media allows us to construct groups that we're comfortable in, it's that the algorithm is designed to create these kind of echo chambers because it is based on what gets engagement, and like it encourages more engagement with those same things. I am not an expert in the kind of media behind the algorithm behind the media, but I do know enough to know that this is like a major issue in things like who has voice and who gets to be involved in discourse right now because it's so algorithm driven.
Right. So the question I have about that is like, so underlying all of this, engagement is, there are these base instincts that sort of underlie cancel culture, right? And like I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we might turn that around and that stuff around into like actual engaging, productive conversation. So because like it was Loretta J. Ross. I think you've probably heard of her. She has developed a framework around this, with a suggestion about calling people in rather than calling people out. It's Kathleen Fitzpatrick talks about this in a different way. She, in her book, Generous Thinking, with the idea that you should assume positive intent and own negative impact. So, if I say something, that upsets Paris, if Paris can decide, okay, I'm going to assume Robin didn't realize what she said was hurtful to me. But then I also, if Paris says, hey, that was hurtful to me, I need to own that was hurtful and issue an actual apology, not some sort of silly non-apology. That turned into a very reviewer 2 moment there where I was just more of a comment than a question. But the question is actually, do you have any thoughts about how we make this more?
Yeah. So I'm going to respond in 2 ways. One, I think it is very valuable to think in terms of how your message is received versus impact. And, that's not like new because we think in terms of polysemous communication, right? Like your message could be received in any number of ways, and you don't necessarily have control over that because meaning is created in dialogue and in discourse. So you have to be aware of the fact that, if I say something to you, you may perceive that in a way I did not intend, and I have to be prepared for that impact. I do want to maybe slightly push back on the calling in versus calling out, not because I think that's a bad idea. I definitely think we need to work on this concept of bringing people into the conversation, but it's kind of like the idea of invitational rhetoric, which you don't have to know anything about. It's just the idea that instead of um, creating this kind of forceful argument, we invite people into the conversation. It's sort of similar. But my fear with something like that is it puts the onus of reparation and justice on people who have already been dealing with oppression.
Yeah.
And I don't know that that is necessarily a good form of justice. The truth is, some people deserve to be angry. Uh, and I am very hesitant to do anything that uh, smacks of tone policing. For years we called for civil discourse and that kind of thing, and there's value in that. But quite honestly, there are some things that we should be angry about.
Mhm.
Right.
Like rape culture ticks me off. It just does. And I think that's deserved. I think of Frederick Douglass in his What to the Slave is the 4th of July, and he says there comes a time when scorching irony is what is necessary, because if you make the good arguments over and over and over again, and they are rejected, you're not dealing with people of goodwill. So what is necessary at that point is to just get a little salty. Um, because that's the only thing that people can respond to. Now, that of course opens up all kinds of problems with the outrage machine, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know if it's necessarily a time to say we shouldn't be as outraged as we should, as it is time to think about what outrage is justified and how do we take that outrage and make it into something productive.
Wow, and I love that speech by Douglas.
Yes.
Thank you.
One of my favorites.
So actually, speaking of people who are easily outraged and maybe not necessarily with justification, and I was thinking about the marketplace and how you say that the marketplace is not necessarily a good metaphor for understanding cancel culture, but it seems to be the one that legislators have decided, okay, this is our way in. This is how we are able to talk about social media and public speech. Is that the right approach? Are we going, right? Is this something that requires legislation? And if it is, which I really want to hear your answer to that, how do we like not overcorrect? How do we get to the point of doing something that,
I just think that's such a, yeah, you've hit on such a thorny issue. On the one hand, um, if you think about it like the marketplace, you get into like, how do we legislate? It comes back to what Karis and I were talking about, right? You'd be legislating an algorithm. Um, and like, how do you, I can't even, it is not within my legal imagination to even think about how you would start to legislate an algorithm to figure out like the speech of these computer programs that are like, because that's how we get to these outrageous levels of speech that we are at. So, I mean, that in and of itself is the first problem. The second problem, in thinking of it like a marketplace, the marketplace of ideas has become this hegemonic metaphor, right? Like we think of speech in these monetary terms, and I think that is so problematic because the first thing it does is monetize speech, right? And the problem with monetizing speech is that means we're basically thinking of it as something you trade for influence. And I think that is hugely problematic because it automatically disempowers people who don't have resources, which is people of color, LGBTQIA people, women, uh, people who are differently abled, right? All of these people who don't have those resources to go out and trade in the marketplace, their speech is like already not as valuable because they do not have the resources walking into this marketplace. So like in my perfect world, we just blow the marketplace metaphor up and out. Um, but this is why, going back to that first thing you asked me, why I'm so interested in identity and the law, because if we don't figure out how to extricate this metaphor from the law, then we are like intimately bound up in neoliberal capital ideas of who we are as speakers, right? Like, as a speaker, I am a capitalist because that is the metaphor that we have like laid over the law. So, if there's not an effort to disrupt that metaphor, then we're going to be stuck in areas where we're trying to legislate algorithms and we're constantly going to be trying to figure out how do we empower or even disempower certain people because we're thinking of things in terms of trade and that like devalues speech to begin with. It devalues people. So unless we can start thinking of speech as something constitutive, as something associated with identity, I think this is just a downward spiral in so many ways. That's not a hopeful answer, but I think there needs to be some effort to disrupt that metaphor.
Okay. In your conclusion, you encourage readers to critically evaluate their own participation in cancel culture discussions and consider the broader societal implications. What steps do you recommend individuals to take to promote responsible engagement with cancel culture, both online and offline?
Yeah, great question. I really think we need to ask ourselves, why am I upset? Who am I upset at? And what can I do about it? Because, you know, as I was saying earlier, and Josh, you're so right. Like any problem that I can throw Frederick Douglass at, like I'm happier about, right? Like that's just a good solution to anything. Um, it's not so much uh oh, I'm angry and that ought to like delegitimizes what I'm doing. We need to ask ourselves, how can I make this productive? Because it's not enough to just say, listening to this person anymore. The next step is to ask, how can I make this an active thing? Right? Like, well, something as simple as, okay, uh, I used to be a huge Harry Potter fan, like huge. When I was like younger, I went to the midnight releases, like big into Harry Potter. I don't feel comfortable being in that fandom anymore. And like there are whole conversations you can have about separating the art from the artist, and I am fine having those conversations. But for me, I have loved ones who are trans, and I just like I can't support that fandom anymore. That's just the thing. And it would be one thing for me to like get online and just she's such a transphobe, blah 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 blah. But there has to be something active to be done. So we have gotten rid of our Harry Potter stuff and we make like choices not to give money to that particular fandom. These are small things, but you have to find a way to be active about your outrage because one of the things about we were just talking about the social media aspect of it
Mm-hmm.
that fuels the outrage machine. But if you're just like, clicktivism, that's that's just engaging the algorithm. If there's not something productive that comes of it, then it's just fueling a machine that doesn't go anywhere. It's just an ongoing engine that doesn't power anything. So I think the question we have to ask about engaging in cancel culture is not who am I canceling, but what am I doing to advance like those that have been disempowered because of it. That was a long answer. I'm sorry.
This is a good answer.
That's a good answer. Yeah. You made me think too, because I love what you said about like, stop and think about who you're mad at. And it reminded me of a conversation I was having with someone one day, and they'd heard something on the radio that was just made them so mad. And I was like, and so we started talking about it, and he said to me, well, how can you say that blah blah blah? And I'm like, I didn't say that. I was like, if you're mad at the person on the radio, you need to call them and be mad at them.
Yes.
I said nothing of the sort. And we actually had a productive conversation after that, because I was like, here's what I think. Just because that person said people like me think this does not mean that I think this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So anyway, you made me think about that conversation. So that's a strategy if that works for anybody out there. So we're coming up to the end of our time, and I do know that you have a podcast of your own. Do you want to give us a spiel about it?
I have a podcast. It's called Kairoticast. That's Kairoticast. And it is on the intersection of rhetorical ideas and current events. So, it airs on one side or the other, depending on what's going on in the world. So, my last episode was just on kind of what is rhetoric, kind of a redo of an older episode. But today I'll be recording something on like personhood and abortion because, let's just go for the easy topics. Not going to make
Yeah.
anybody mad that way.
Not going to get canceled at all.
Yeah.
Talking about that.
Outrage. What do I know? But it's a way, it is my attempt to make some of these really big ideas accessible and show that these things that we talk about in like these 300 and 400 level classes that so many people think of as like, I'll never use this again. It's my way of showing, no, actually, these are really helpful in understanding the world. And we can like,
Mm-hmm.
this is useful stuff if you stop and think about like application things.
Great. So yeah, and I've listened to it, and it's pretty awesome. I recommend you check it out. But that is all the time we have today. Thank you so much for joining us and for a fantastic conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time.
Good.
Thank you. So I think we're ready for check this out.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Check This Out segment of our podcast. I'm Paris Whalen.
And I'm Joshua Ortiz-Bagro. Today, we're diving into this really complex realm of media literacy and its intersections with cancel culture.
Yeah, indeed. People have challenged each other's views politely and not so civil for much of human history. So this is not a new concept. Even in antiquity, Greco-Romans used curse tablets to air their grievances. But the internet, particularly social media, like we were talking about earlier, has really changed the how, when, and where these kinds of interactions occur. These digital dialogue take place in spaces like social media platforms, forums like Reddit, and podcasts, and even online petitions. There's various opportunities. So the number of people who can go online and call out others for their behavior has increased immensely with access to the internet. And it's never been easier to summon groups of like-minded people into action.
Yeah.
If you know what I'm referring to.
Which can be a good thing and can be a bad thing, right? So cancel culture in GLAMs has also become something really important. And when we say GLAMs, we mean galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. So the history of GLAMs and the cultural heritage materials and the collections that they house, they reflect both the best and the worst of human cultures.
Mm-hmm.
So this means that bigger debates in society about what is controversial, what is offensive, is really central to their work and missions. They're not, magically separate from these things. So when the goal of your organization is to safeguard histories and knowledge, you can't really represent the good and then kind of gloss over the bad. And vice versa, right? You can't focus simply on the bad and then forget all of these more diverse or different points of view. At the same time, you don't want to perpetuate harmful stereotypes and biases, right? So how do GLAMs stay faithful to the historical record or current events without falling into the trap of what we call both sidism, which is kind of a mouthful, but it simply means when two opposing ideas are treated as if they were balanced, even though one of those ideas isn't really balanced or makes sense, right? So think of flat Earth theories. It wouldn't really make sense to take flat Earth theories seriously in geography. You can't present two sides of that. So these kind of useful and sometimes illogical debates around restricting expression, inclusion, and diversity, which are apparently bad words in polite society nowadays. These debates are, they influence every part of how we preserve, how we teach, and how we provide access to cultural heritage.
Yeah. And, there's also the very real life issue of, financial and reputational risk for these institutions. Many of them rely on grants, community support, and other funding opportunities to stay afloat. But if their behavior, whether it be the type of programming they're doing, the exhibitions, or even individuals within their institution, if they're inconsistent with the community around them, it may spark a debate and cause a withdrawal of support, which then leads to loss of funding and diminished public trust and possibly shutdown.
So yeah, heavy burden for those events in GLAMs that are fighting the good fight.
Yeah, now that we bummed everybody out, I agree. But, let's get into talking about actual cancel culture and how media literacy plays a pivotal role in navigating the complexities of it. So I just want to start out with an example. I don't know if you remember this incident in 2020 where this professor at the University of Southern California was suspended for saying a Chinese word that sounded like an English slur. If not, I just pulled a random article that I would have run across in my everyday consumption of media so y'all could kind of see what this looks like.
Yeah, I remember this, and it really sparked outrage with Black students, alumni, and other people just concerned with this instructor's approach. And I remember the students actually reported the professor to the dean for being culturally insensitive and just being a bad teacher, basically. And this has become such a classic example. I can think of a couple TV shows where there's a version of this going on, where professor puts her foot in their mouth with or without the intention to,
Yes.
And students take action.
Yeah. And this incident actually resulted in the professor being removed from the course and replaced with a different instructor. But more importantly, for this topic, it resulted in backlash and can be seen as kind of aligning with the concept of cancel culture. You know, something offensive has taken place in the public eye and the offender is being called out. So what's he going to do about it?
Yeah. But yeah, there's also a ton of other factors going on, right? So there's power dynamics in the classroom as a professor versus students, the media coverage, how the media decided to cover this, the current political climate, because this is happening during the social awakening that movements like Black Lives Matter spawned in the US and across the world, and also the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, among other people that we could list on and on and on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So as consumers of media, what can we all do about this? You know, how can we contextualize this event, and how can media literacy help us navigate these complex issues?
So this will probably sound familiar if you tuned into our other episodes. First and foremost, critical analysis of information is crucial. We need to question the different viewpoints and arguments, analyze how the topic is portrayed in various media sources, and consider the potential consequences of cancel culture on individuals and society. This has impacts, right? These are specific questions you would ask to read when you're reading these articles, again, to gain context on the event. So in light of the example of the instructor, it's helpful to think through these, right? What are the different viewpoints or arguments surrounding the topic? Are the sides balanced? Do you even get two sides? Or is it just a one-sided hit piece?
Mm-hmm.
How is the topic portrayed in different media sources? Are there differences in tone, bias, or framing? Is there inflammatory language? So, you know, are you talking about language that's using words like war or fire or synonyms of words and fires solely with the intention to grab readers' attention?
Yeah.
Right? As you answer these questions and you start getting some context from different perspectives, your original opinion may be supported. You might have figured it out right off the bat, or it may cause you to question intent and context. Right? Mm-hmm. So things like setting, geographic location, language, culture, right? So all of these questions to answer what is actually going on here.
Yeah. And another thing you're touching on here is that with more information, there has to be an awareness of bias and manipulation, right? So what does that mean? We must understand how cultural controversies are framed by the media, which means these underlying biases, agendas, and narratives, as well as the use of things like selective editing, like you were talking about, using words like fire or war to kind of grab attention from the viewers and to grab clicks. But all media outlets have an audience that they cater to, and all individuals have biases. And in this 24/7 news cycle, we are always receiving updates and bits of information that can be crucial to contextualizing an event, right? So with the instructor in the story mentioned, he received criticism from current students, from alumni. He also received the support from previous students. And there were individuals who also participated in the discussion through social media and media coverage. You know, each one of these perspectives are colored by experience along with the current climate that we talked about earlier.
Right. You can't forget about the current climate. And like we mentioned, this is happening in 2020. The Black Lives Matter movement was front and center in the media spotlight and new for a lot of people who had not been paying attention. And students were even more visibly active in pushing institutions to address systemic racism, which has promoted greater awareness of these issues.
Yeah, exactly. Now, on the flip side, there was support from the previous students, as I mentioned, and there was also evidence that the professor attempted to do his due diligence when preparing for his course. So how do we decide what's right? Unfortunately for him, in the public eye, he missed the mark, completely missed the mark. And while his intention for using the word was probably clear to him as an educational lesson, no one else can assume what his intentions were. And the university had the responsibility to take action.
Exactly. And I mentioned how GLAM institutions can be affected by cancel culture, and you, Paris, brought up the financial and reputational risks. That's part of the conversation as well. Educational institutions have values that they're trying to uphold, and we are fierce defenders of the First Amendment, and we're strongly against unfair censorship. So when an individual or groups act in a way that put these values at risk, institutions have to respond strategically and ethically, we hope.
Which is a whole nother conversation, right? We all have opinions on how our institutions should handle these situations.
Right. So finally, let's not forget about the responsible sharing and engagement taking place by the students and those participating in dialogue through various mediums. These are some of the conversations about the topic. Paris and I, we always like to visit the comment section, but realistically, how many of the commenters are actually fact-checking sources to avoid spreading misinformation? Are they promoting respectful dialogue? I'm not sure. And to be fair, I cannot assume. Right. But for our audience, if you've been tuning into any of our other episodes, to gather the story from different perspectives. So in this case, not just an article written by higher ed, but local coverage, which might give insights into what we talked about, the climate of the city, campus coverage. Majority of campuses have their own newspapers as well. And these will help you measure reactions from stakeholders like students.
Yeah.
Also, extra points if you cite your findings in the dialogue. There's no restriction in comment section for you to cite things.
Not my strength. But I can always do it after the fact. But so basically what we're saying as GLAM professionals is that by fostering media literacy skills, we can contribute to a more informed and empathetic approach to controversial subjects. Media literacy is basically the key to understanding how these stories are structured and how individuals have the power to engage in dialogue about difficult subjects.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This is just one example of the challenges faced by GLAM institutions, but by being vigilant and informed, we can work towards a more equitable and just society.
Yeah. If you want to know more about that story, go look it up for yourself, form your own opinion. We'd love to hear it. Why not? We're not going to cancel you unless you get wild. But that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for tuning in to check this out.
Until next time, stay curious and keep questioning the world around you.
And that brings us to the end of our journey on this censorship.
Nope.
You're definitely canceled, Robin.
Cancel. Out. Bye.
Yeah, thank you. Goodbye. Thank you all for joining us, though, and we will see you next time.